Hey everyone, glad to be here. Today I'm presenting some preliminary results from a study which is joint work with Thomas Bouchot. Thomas is a brilliant PhD student from ONS in Paris. He's a behavioral scientist. I'm a behavioral economist. This is not really a behavioral study though, it is more of a statistical study. And it actually came from noticing a statistical puzzle when working with life satisfaction data from different surveys. We got intrigued into this puzzle and a little bit worried, and that's why we decided to study it systematically. So first thing first, what about life satisfaction? Mark told us everything we wanted or didn't want to know about it. So I'm not going to spend much more time, except one good reason to try and improve the life satisfaction measure, which is there is an increasing attention to this measure, not only in academia, but also from institutions and policymakers. In the OECD countries which have a well-being framework, 85% of them use life satisfaction. So we have this measure more and more as a social thermometer, and we want to be sure that this thermometer measure things quite right insofar as we can. So what is this puzzle, what we call the survey fingerprint puzzle? I think a good way of presenting it is through a very simple question that was actually answered in Mark's presentation, which is on a scale from 0 to 10, what was the level of life satisfaction in the UK in the winter 2018-19? Now, it's hard to answer this question, paradoxically, not because we do not have the data, but rather because we have too much data. And datasets disagree. So what Mark showed is the data from the UK annual population survey, which gives a 7.7. But this measure is actually quite different, half a scale point different, from the data from the European Social Survey. Now, these are two big surveys run in the same country on representative samples. Another question could be, okay, let's go back in time, 2014, who was happier between Chinese or British? Well, it depends on the dataset that you check. Here there are two datasets using the country ladder. According to the data of the Pew Research Center, Chinese people were significantly happier than the Brits. According to the Gallup World Poll, it was the reverse. So essentially, different surveys give different answers. And again, these answers are representative of the same population, use the same psychometric method, so the same question, the same scale, and they were run over the same period. So what we try to do in this study is to try and understand how bad is it. So is it just that we run into some not really comparable surveys, or is it quite common, and what are the implications of this? So to try and make progress, we collected data from 8 surveys. This is overall more than 100 waves and over 2 million interviews. It's not really a meta-analysis in the sense that we are not basing our work on estimates from other studies, but it's a meta-analytical approach. We are taking raw data from the survey and see what these different datasets tell us. So in one slide, what did we do? So we compiled a list of representative surveys which used comparable life satisfaction measures, because of course there are different measures, from 2002 to 2022. And what we find is that estimates of mean life satisfaction are actually often significantly different. And this is what we call the survey fingerprint puzzle, in the sense that it seems that each survey leaves its fingerprint on the life satisfaction metric. Now, when we look at the implication of this for regression analysis, we have some better news. So the sign of the regression coefficients do not flip, they are actually stable, but the sizes of regression coefficients can vary significantly. When we look at international comparisons, counter rankings are mostly stable, although there can be some swaps. cautionary note before I go ahead, this is work in progress. So this is not only a cautionary note, but also an invitation to share your inputs, since this can actually be very useful at this stage. So let me move to the data. We collected these 8 surveys based on some criteria. So the first one is we selected 2 countries to focus on, UK and France, and a continent, Europe, or global surveys. Why this choice? Mostly because of data availability. They must include one of these 2 measures, either the country ladder or a general life satisfaction question on a scale from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, and contain at least one of the following information: employment status, marital status, or income, and be representative at least at the age and gender level. Last criterion, we need at least 2 waves. I discovered during this work some amazing surveys which were run only once, but yeah, never replicated, so we excluded these ones. This is the list of the dataset. Some of them are international, some of them are national. Warning, we have no pretension of being exhaustive in this exercise. Actually, if you have suggestions for, see, Antonio does have suggestions. So if you have suggestions for other datasets to be integrated, we are well aware that there are more. So what is the puzzle? I explained it with an example. This, I think, is the best way of explaining it graphically. So what is this graph? On the y-axis, you have the life satisfaction scale point. On the x-axis, you have the time axis. Each point is the estimated mean life satisfaction in France according to a particular wave. Different colors refer to different surveys. So for instance, do I have a pointer? Yes. So this point here tells us that according to the European Social Survey, in 2003, life satisfaction in France was 6.3. There are 3 things to notice in this graph. So the first one, which has already been shown by Angus Deaton, is that we have a high within survey consistency. That is to say, different waves of the same survey tend to give comparable results. So here you have the ESS, it doesn't go up and down crazily. It tends to be variations around a stable trend. Second thing to notice, also documented by Deaton, is that sometimes you can have some abrupt shocks in a survey. And you can see it here in 2013 in the SRCV, which is the French version of the USILC. What did happen in France in 2013? SRCV changed its questionnaire. So it's not about a change in the question which is asked. The question is the same. It are the questions which are asked before which are different. This is not new either. It has already been shown on Gallup. But what is new, to the best of my knowledge, is that 2 surveys which are run around the same time, so you look at ESS and EQLS, so the European Quality of Life Survey, give quite different estimates. Now, the whiskers are 95% confidence interval. And here they are quite interesting because in frequentist statistics, the very definition of a confidence interval for a mean is if we take 100 samples from the population, well, 95% will have the mean within the confidence interval. But here it doesn't seem to be the case. So this is the data for France. If we look at the UK, the message is similar. So there tends to be some consistency over time for the same survey, but not so much between surveys. So this raises the question, is life satisfaction actually comparable across surveys? And to wrap up the two key messages is, over time, different waves of the same survey give similar estimates, but we have a low reliability between surveys. Now, how can we test this a little bit more formally? We ran an analysis based on 3 steps. So the first step is to define what are 2 comparable waves. Because in terms of country, it's easy. It's France. I mean, it's easy. It tends to be easier. But in terms of period, you rarely have 2 surveys which are run exactly at the same time. So we considered as comparable 2 waves where collection periods overlap. So you have 2 periods and they overlap in at least part of it. Based on this, when we identify 2 survey waves which are comparable, we run binary t-tests of mean life satisfaction. Of course, we use survey weights in all this. And we study the proportion of the pairwise tests that reject the null hypothesis of the equality. So essentially, in how many comparisons do we have different mean life satisfaction? So if there was no measurement error, non-random measurement error, if we had the random measurement error, it would not be a big problem. But in theory, this proportion should be lower than 5%. What we find is that it's actually about 80%. So this is presented graphically. So on the left column, the myriad of numbers that you're not going to read are the periods which are comparable periods. So the last line tells us that we have at least 2 surveys which are comparable between August 2021 and December 2021 in France. These 2 surveys give a life satisfaction estimate which is different by 0.25 points, and this difference is statistically significant. Out of the comparisons that we make, all except 4 give statistically significant differences. When we run this analysis in the UK, we get similar results. That is to say, these black squares, which are the difference between the estimates, tend to be far from 0, while they should overlap with the 0 line on the left. So overall, we have 39 comparisons, and 80% of them reject the quality of mean life satisfaction. So this puzzle seems to be quite, more the norm than an exception. And something that worried us is, okay, what are the implications for regression analysis? So what we did is we essentially ran the same type of analysis, but with the regression coefficients. That is to say, when we identified 2 surveys which are comparable, we ran the same explanatory model of life satisfaction, and then we compared the coefficients that we estimated. We consider 7 explanatory variables, and here there is some good news. So the first good news is there is no sign reversal. What does it mean? It means that we don't find 2 surveys where you have unemployed people which are more satisfied than employed people. This never happens. There is always a qualitative difference, a directional difference, which is consistent. What about the magnitude of the estimates? It's mostly consistent, but not always consistent. It actually depends on the explanatory variable. So mostly gender, partner, and being inactive tend to be consistent across surveys. That is to say, the magnitude of the regression coefficient associated with gender, partner, and inactive tend to be consistent when estimated from 2 surveys which are run at the same time in the same country, but they're 2 different surveys. It's a little bit worse for age, unemployment, and being a student, where we have statistically equal coefficients in 65 to 75% of cases. We also but rather estimate that there are significant survey fixed effects. In 38% of the cases, the intercept of our regression, so the part that is that is fixed survey to fixed effect, in 38% of the cases is different from a survey to the other. I'm going to skip international comparisons. The only thing I'm going to show you is a bit of good news, which is, so in this graph, you can see the estimated mean life satisfaction from two different surveys on European countries. Ideally, what we would like is that every estimate is around the 45% degree line. It would mean that the two surveys are perfectly consistent. Now, this, of course, is never the case, but you can see that they are highly correlated and close to the 45% line. So overall, in international surveys, mean estimates do not change so much from one country, from one survey to the other. I have more to say about it, but maybe it's for the discussion. Let me rather answer maybe a burning question, which is, okay, we have these differences, why? Why do we observe these differences? And we tried to scrutinize many methodological explanations, but none of them come up as a unique, satisfactory explanation. So for instance, there are different modes of interviews, slightly different wording, the placement of the question in the questionnaire, so forth and so on. But none of them alone can explain the differences that we observe. A caveat on this is we have very little variation. So mode of interview means that we have, I think, 2 surveys which are by telephone, and the rest are by in person. So this is very little to actually being able to identify what the causes is. The cause might be something else, might be a combination of all these. What is our next challenge is to find a solution to try and improve the reliability across surveys. So coming back to the original question, so is life satisfaction comparable across surveys? So when we talk about means, the answer tends to be no, not really. When we are talking about country rankings, mostly yes. When we talk about the gap between socio-demographic groups, so are unemployed people 0.5 more satisfied than employed, for instance? Well, mostly yes, although not always. When it comes to directional differences, then yes, these are very, very robust results. We have some preliminary recommendations, but mostly is if you're using data from different surveys, do use survey fixed effects, definitely. And if you are using time series from different surveys, always consider the change in the questionnaire as a potential cause for the change in means. And I would say that I will leave you with this slide, and thank you for your attention.
Hi, so thank you for the really cool presentation. Actually, I really enjoyed the topic. And I have a question. So to break the ice, I have some kind of obvious question. I'm sorry, I have to ask it. Actually, your demonstration is based on the assumption that they are actually representative of the same population. Did you have tested actually this assumption? Because at some point I can imagine that they are all complex, they all have complex survey designs, and they can vary maybe according to some slight variation around, according to some dimensions, and that could lead, at least partly, to the discrepancies that you mentioned. That's all, thanks.
Do you want to answer, or should I take another?
Just seconding the question, I'm wondering if you observe any difference between official surveys that are conducted by commercial entities or from official statistics offices, or the entity who is running the survey.
Thanks. I was just wondering whether you have information on the day of the week and the time of the day in which the survey was undertaken. And also, it would be really interesting to exactly replicate your analysis with another measure, like a more standard EQ5D type measure, and see if you get the same result?
Thanks. I have a very quick comment which echoes a little bit the earlier point. So to keep people from getting depressed after the presentation, a similar point has been made, for instance, in Belgium about inequality research. We have 1 year for which we have 2 surveys, and I believe that the Gini coefficient is very, very different, to the extent that it even leads to different substantive results about the evolution of inequality. So as I already mentioned, I do inequality research, and I don't dare to say whether inequality actually goes up or goes down in Belgium because of that reason.
Anyone else?
Just another follow-up. This was super cool. In a way, you could decompose these differences. You could decompose them into a component of, oh, different people were being surveyed, right? Because you observe covariate, so you can just reweight them to be on a common scale, and then get the means from that, and then you get the idiosyncratic survey fixed effect. Because currently you get a mixture of differences in the population that was surveyed and sort of slight differences maybe in the question, like ESS to ONS4 is slightly different. And it would be nice to decompose that.
Thank you very much for the question. So I'll try to go quickly and in order. In terms of the representativeness, so there are slight differences in terms of the coverage. So for instance, in some surveys, you have people in hospitals or not in hospitals. They are representative, or at least at the gender and age level. This is something that definitely could explain part of the difference, but the differences are very big. So it's quite unlikely, I think, to be due to the part of the population which is not covered. They all refer to the same area. So for France is metropolitan, which is the European one. There was a question about commercial surveys. So Gallup, for the Gallup World Poll, is, I think, the only commercial entity which run a poll among the ones that we study. Mostly the ones that we study are from either statistical institutes or other consortia. But again, since we have only 8, it's quite hard to just pin down a difference based on this. We're not sure. Day and time, we would love to know it. The thing is, different surveys vary wildly in the amount of metadata, essentially, that are available. So we typically do not have the day of the week. We typically have the month. The hour of the survey, definitely we do not have it, I think, for any of these ones. Is it something that could explain it? Yes. If, for instance, let's say CAM in France is always run on Mondays, we know that people tend to be less happy on Mondays. What we can look at are seasonal effects, because some of these surveys are high frequencies, in particular CAM. There are seasonal effects, but they're typically too small to explain this. So they might play a role. They can't explain everything. So it might be a combination of things. But yeah, it's a good point. And yes, the second point was, I think, about the fact that this can be applied to different measures. Definitely. So this is definitely something that is not only related to life satisfaction. I would say in general, every measure has measurement errors. Also GDP has measurement error. Life satisfaction, like some other constructs, like trust, is a little bit tricky since it's not based on observable characteristics per se. So we only have the survey value. But definitely we could run, and this I think answers also the following question, we could and should, we need more time, to run also this analysis on other constructs. So yes, definitely. About Casper's question on the decomposition, if I get it right, what you have in mind is that we could essentially decompose the different means in different parts. So what we did, I don't know if to answer your question is probably very far in the slides, but is if you think at the difference, so, you know, you have 2 countries which have average different life satisfaction. Why? one country and 2 surveys, this is not really affected by random errors. So at least one of these things must be true. Either there are fixed effects, or the relationship is different, or the subpopulation are different. Now, these are all kind of a bit true. So we would love to tell you this is exactly the reason. Survey fixed effects seem to explain a big part of it, but I'm not going to put my last word on it. Is it what you had in mind? Yes. Okay. So yeah. I don't know if I have time or. Minutes? No, I'm not going to. The question is, are you using weights? Of course, yes. So yes, so we use survey weights, but it's survey weights are a little bit tricky in the sense that the sampling frame might be different. So the survey weights are going to account for the fact that maybe we have 55% of women in the sample and there are 51%. But it doesn't account for the fact that are we taking into consideration people in a hospital or not, or people who are homeless or not. So these are a little bit different points, but definitely we're using survey weights, yeah.